Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this fifth and final budget forum for the 16-17 budget year. Dave and I are going to take you through a fairly short slide deck and then reserve the rest of the time for any questions or discussion that you would like to have. Just our standard reminder that if you know of people who can't be present today but who'd like to view this, it will be up on the budget update page within a couple of days as soon as we can load the video onto that page. And the final or the usual reminder that your presence here today indicates your consent to have speech and image recorded as part of the presentation. If at the end of the presentation you have questions, please come down to one of the two microphones and just introduce yourself, state your name and perhaps your department or unit, so that people watching the video know who you are. We're going to focus on the operating budget this morning. It was approved by the Board of Governors yesterday at their meeting, and we've briefed the university leadership team earlier this morning and have already met with the chair of the Council Committee on Budget at 9:30 this morning. So we have premised the budget decisions on the following things: student success, research impact, community outreach, indigenization, and sustainability, all of which will be very familiar to you as the key elements, the three pillars and the two threads of the strategic plan. For the 22nd year, the operating budget is balanced. This year it is at $214.9 million. There are no job losses. There are some adjustments to positions that we'll get into in a moment, but there is no job loss in this budget. Following the advice of the Council Committee on Budget and other bodies as well, there are no across-the-board budget reductions. Instead, 6 units, and we'll give you details on those in a few moments, we'll see unit budget reductions of between 1 and 2%. And the total of those reductions is approximately $700,000. At the same time, as I think everybody understands, salaries and benefits continue to increase annually. So despite those cuts in 6 units, all but 1 unit budget, and that's the Johnson Shayama School, which we'll come to later, actually sees a budget increase to afford to cover the costs of increased salaries and benefits, from progression through the ranks, CGIs, merits, market supplements, and everything else. Salaries and benefits are now over 75% of the operating budget, and the tuition and fees, again, which we'll give you some detail on in a minute, are now 37.5% of operating revenues. As you know, when the province announced its budget some weeks ago, the actual allocation to the university, the operating allocation, was 0%, but there was an additional $997,000 given as part of an adjustment to what's called the SUFM, the Saskatchewan University's funding mechanism. And that's the series of algorithms that determines what goes to the University of Saskatchewan and what goes to the University of Regina. We received an additional $1 million on that adjustment to the SUFM because largely, almost entirely, of the enrollment increases that we've seen at the university in recent years. This year we've made a change. We have budgeted for an increase in enrollments of 1%. In previous years, we've kept the projected enrollment increase to 0. It's been a conservative way of approaching it. Given the steady growth that we have seen in recent years, this year we have built in a 1% enrollment increase. It's something we think is achievable, and right now, looking at where we are for the fall term, we think we will be on track to achieve that. What we need to bear in mind is that doing that increases our risks slightly, in that international enrollments particularly are very volatile and very fragile. And if, for example, a country such as Saudi Arabia or Nigeria ceases supporting students through a government program, we can very quickly lose substantial numbers of international students. So that 1% is a reasonable, we believe, approach to the enrollment growth we've seen and what we think is practicable for this year. Revenues will go up 3.8%. Salaries and benefits across the institution are going up $5 million. So that's our major cost driver and our major cost increase. Overall budgeted expenditures are up 6.1. So the difference between the 5 and the 6.1, we've given you just a few examples of those. The new facilities in Saskatoon for the Faculty of Nursing and Faculty of Social Work, increased space here and there to research for places like JSGS and other operations, mean additional rental costs of $115K. Insurance is going up $66. The employee tuition plans in the collective agreements, we have negotiated the ability to pay staff to take classes, basically, and that's going up $117,000K. IT contracts, the things that pay for example, the banner system and all of the enterprise software systems, are going up more than $250,000, and a large part of that, of course, is the exchange rate. Where are we reinvesting? Where are we putting new resources? In the Faculty of Engineering and Applied Science, you have seen enrollment increases of 52% in the last 5 years. So that faculty has grown by half in 5 years. We are therefore putting 3 new academic positions into engineering and applied science to meet the demands and try to bring course sizes and section sizes down in that faculty, which is booming. Similarly, there will be 2 new academic positions in kinesiology and health studies, reflecting the fact that that faculty has grown by over a quarter in the same period. We're putting a new admissions officer in to take care of the needs of new permanent residents. These are people who are, of course, permanent residents of the country, but have many needs similar to those of international students. They are not international, they are Canadian, new permanent residents of Canada. And we will be taking care, or trying to take care of, some of their needs with a new admissions officer. To boost our retention, which is again a strategic goal of the university embedded in the strategic plan, we are base funding 2 new academic advisors in the central unit in student affairs. The target work for these people, the target audience, if you like, for these people, will be students in transition from faculty to faculty. Students basically who are at a higher degree of academic risk because they've been RTD'd from business, and they need centralized and specialized advising services to help them succeed at the university. We've all read and heard in recent years about the increasing needs of students for mental health supports, and therefore we're putting in an additional psychologist, a student counselor, to assist Dr. Klippenstein in student affairs with the needs, the extreme needs in some cases of students for counseling services. And again, the workload in the Harassment and Discrimination Prevention Office has increased exponentially in the last 3 or 4 years. And therefore, we are adding 1 position to the existing 1 position in that office to assist with that workload. The budget contains nearly an additional $500,000, $455,000 to be precise, and increased financial support for undergraduate and graduate students. And for the 3rd consecutive year, we're putting $200,000 each into engineering and in science for upgrading, teaching, and lab equipment. For indigenization, again, a key part of the strategic plan, last year we base funded the executive lead position, which is now occupied by Emily Grafton, who's just recently been recruited into that position to succeed Shawneen Pete, who is returning to faculty ranks. What we're going to do is base fund a support position and provide some small amounts of operating budget so that we can do outreach to the local First Nations and indeed strengthen our bonds with those among the communities that surround and support us. We're putting $25,000 into an elder in residence for the Faculty of Education. Education has taken a leading role in the indigenization of its spaces, of its curricula, of its outreach, a profound indigenization of a faculty, of course, that is training teachers who are going to be going out and teaching Indigenous children. And some one-time funding, I think $25,000 to refurbish some counseling rooms in the Faculty of Education, again, to reflect that commitment to indigenization.
I'll speak to research. Dave Malloy, VP Research, would be here, except he's at his desk, hopefully receiving an incredibly important phone call about success in the Canada First Research Excellence Fund. So that will be a major coup if we happen to get that, and hopefully it's a positive call that comes through. In the meantime, we're investing. Last year, as you recall, invested significantly into research. This year it continues that trend, not quite in as much depth, but still quite significant. our experience with MyTax has been nothing but positive. A huge number of scholarships and opportunities for students that have been funded from that organization, that it's well worth the additional $82,000 that we'll provide for full membership into MyTax. We'll be funding we're fortunate to be able to get some Fulbright chairs and funding 2 scholarships to host Fulbright chairs here at the University of Regina. Also supporting the Fedoric Chair in Nuclear Imaging in the Faculty of Science. And as was mentioned before, continuing to increase support to students in the way of financial aid and awards, so $66,000. We're also, the Faculty of Graduate Studies and Research is undertaking a unit review right now. So while we think that there might be a requirement for permanent staff, this year we're just funding it on a one-time basis as term to be able to get an awards officer in place to help with admissions and all of the paperwork that's necessary in an ever-growing faculty with lots of additional applications in the area of faculty or in graduate studies. Tuition fees, always a subject of great importance, deliberated extensively, researched extensively in terms of what the impact is and the history of student debt and what our students are experiencing. As a result of all that, we've recommended and the board has approved a tuition increase of 3.8%. That would be across the board with just a few exceptions, a slightly larger increase in the Faculty of Business for some of those programs, and a slightly smaller increase in the Johnson Shama School to match the tuition increase so that the students, whether they apply through U of S or U of R, end up paying the same fee. At the undergraduate level, no increase at all for international differential, but an increase for the first time in 3 years of 10%. So the international differential fee for graduate students is going from $1,000 a term to $1,100 a term. Should note that even though that might seem like a large increase, it is indeed higher than inflation. But in terms of affordability, we still sit in the top third in terms of the least expensive Canadian universities or English language universities in Canada. We sit at 19th out of 59, even with these fee increases. And something else that we're extremely proud of, we're the second in terms of comprehensive universities, in terms of reinvesting tuition money back into scholarships. And so other than Memorial University in Newfoundland, which has a percentage of tuition, and they have a very low tuition rate, they're number 1 in terms of the lowest tuition rate, they end up beating us. Otherwise, we return about a third of all of the different tuitions. So it works out to be $24 million in student financial aid and awards going back to students every year at the University of Regina.
Maybe just 2 quick things to add. The reason that Memorial's tuition has historically been so low is, of course, the government of Newfoundland has been pouring oil revenues directly into the university. With the cratering of oil prices, that is changing dramatically. Memorial was cut mid-year by $8 million, and no one is quite sure what their future will be in terms of their tuition structure. The other thing we might add here, too, on tuition, with the introduction several years ago of the Saskatchewan Advantage Scholarship, essentially a $500 tuition discount applied up front, net tuition, even after these increases, is lower than it was 5 years ago before the introduction of that plan.
And if I can add even more, the combination of both the Saskatchewan Advantage Scholarship for students to graduate from a high school in Saskatchewan, combined with if a graduate stays in the province and uses the full benefits of the graduate retention program, the net tuition for a Saskatchewan student is basically zero. On to the capital part of the budget. talk to it in two pieces here. First of all, PMR, Preventive Maintenance and Renewal. It's a term that used to be called sustaining capital. This year is a mirror image of last year, both in terms of what we got from the government and how we're allocating it here at the university. So we got just slightly over $5 million this year in this category. That was unchanged, and the places that it's going to are exactly the same. So the biggest piece goes to the facilities folks for campus renewal, $3.5 million, basically back into the bricks and mortar. That would be the second bullet, and also to facilities management to replace things like the furniture in classrooms as it wears out, or in common areas, $138,000 there. There's another almost $1 million worth of debt for borrowing in this area from past projects a number of years ago that we'll be continuing to pay for another 8 years. And of course, $450,000 to maintain the equivalent of bricks and mortar, but on the information technology side, the core computing infrastructure as well. In the capital budget, if you're contrasting that to what's in financial statements and the budget plan, which will also be published on the website, etc., there's lots more that happens on the campus in the way of capital other than just what's funded through the government PMR allocation. So that particular element sort of captures lots of other things that are funded in different ways, many of which are ancillaries, some of which are through unit funding, like the last one, an upgrade to the Faculty of Education and their student services space, to lots of other projects. You would have seen construction activity throughout the campus, of course, in Kissick and in a variety of other areas. Some of these, much like the energy conservation project that we're happy to have partnered with SAS Power. SAS Power is giving us about 37 cents on the dollar to take and do a number of different energy savings upgrades across campus. Many of you probably have been living through those for the past few months, for sure. One thing that I should report this particular time, because it's actually a new project that you haven't heard of, and that's College West. We've done a large evaluation, in-depth evaluation of one of our oldest residents on campus. Luther is older than ours, but it's our oldest one, where we know it's time for a midlife refit. So a $38 million project will be underway over the next couple of years to take and completely retrofit the College West residence building, and that'll be funded through the ancillary operations and future revenue. And of course, College Avenue campus continues to proceed. We're hoping to hear any day now, although I understand there might be further delays, but we've applied for $60 million of Saskatchewan or strategic investment funds from the federal government to take and renovate College Avenue campus. So lots of activity up there. Right now, we're under construction in Dark Hall, and it's closed down while we renovate it, and that is using $3 million worth of donor funds. But stand by, hopefully we'll be able to make announcements soon about some very large capital projects up at College Avenue campus. We'll also be applying for not only the federal Strategic Investment Fund money, but Canadian Cultural Spaces Fund as well, to actually take and retrofit the inside of Dark Hall. So we're very much looking forward to that. That could be another $14 million that we're optimistic for, with the bulk of the funding coming from the federal government program. In terms of one-time funding as well, this particular budget takes and allocates a number of different things, $1.5 million worth of one-time initiatives as per the list. The biggest one being upgrades to classrooms and things, ones that haven't been modernized, and perhaps others that is time to take and renew and make even more modern. We know that leading up to Congress in 2018, that we need to have every classroom not only looking good, but functioning well. So this is a step in that direction as well, that $400,000. One-time projects in UR International, $150,000 there, which actually is not specifically to fund the UR International office, but to enable the UR International office to work with faculties, take and help them help the UR International folks with recruitment and retention programs across campus and with our partners overseas. A student recruiter in the Levine School, which will be joint funded by donations for 3 years to take and help increase revenues there. And as you'll see a theme here, part of what has made this budget possible is increases in recruitment and retention. So every one of those investments then takes and makes the budget making in future years that much easier. So that'll be an example of how we can take and turn that investment into future revenues. Legislative changes require us to change from being payroll being once a month to twice a month. And so that'll be quite a bit of activity. We'll fund that on a term basis for this year, evaluate how much work is done. That might require full-time staff in future years, but this year it'll be fun one time. We've got a couple of different projects. These are one time as well. We've already committed to both a gendered violence and campus sexual assault program that Dr. Roz Kelsey is taking the lead on. And of course, in campus security, we've got a similar program in terms of campus awareness, personal safety, focused of course on sexual assault and initiatives in that area as well. We're doing a review of the athletics program. $25,000 is allocated to that. And the last one, almost $200,000 in fundraising positions that will be funded on a term basis while we take and look at establishing them on a full-time basis as well. This is something that we know that, again, an investment in this area returns 12-fold, I think, is the answer in terms of funding by investing in fundraising.
So maybe just another couple of reasons. By the way, I've noticed, I mentioned Emily Grafton, our new executive lead, but I didn't realize she was in the room. Emily, can you give a wave, because many people won't have met you yet. Welcome. Every point on tuition, as you've seen from the numbers we presented, every percentage on tuition, depending on the mix, undergrad, grad, domestic, international, is somewhere in the range of about $750,000. And therefore, enrollments are becoming increasingly crucial to us. So is student recruitment. And one of the real good bits of news, or bits of good news over the last year, is that our retention rate from first to second year students has jumped by 5%. We were at about 80%. The last report shows that we're up at 85% retention of those students. Obviously, being able to retain students to degree completion helps us as well. And so some of the investments that you've seen around student advising, outreach, of course, to permanent residents and so on, is designed to boost that further to ensure that we have that secure source of student funding coming into us. So by 1 o'clock today, and perhaps a little bit earlier, the full budget plan, the whole comprehensive budget plan, will be available from the budget update page. The budget book for 2016-17, which gives the detailed breakdown, faculty by faculty, department by department, salary code by salary code, will be available on the budget book page as well. The budget letter, the comprehensive budget letter, will be up there so that you can see in summary form everything that we've talked about today in detail, faculty by faculty, unit by unit. All of that information will be available on the web, and the press release will be going out at lunchtime today. So we anticipate media interest, particularly in tuition increase and the effect on our students that increase may or may not have. And we'll talk to the media as they come to talk to us. So that concludes our presentation. If there is anything that you would like to send in to us, that's the address. Right now, however, we have 2 microphones for your comments or questions. We'll do our best to answer them. If we can't answer them this morning, we will commit to get you the answer. We only ask that when you come up to the microphone again, just identify yourself and maybe indicate what unit you're from so that those watching know who you are. Floor is open for your questions.
While we're waiting for the questions, well, I know Tom had committed that we just teased with the slide up there about where the 6 units were with the budget cuts, and maybe we should mention those.
The units with the cuts, a 2% cut going into the Faculty of Arts, a very small cut of less than 1% going into Johnson-Shayama, and that really involves having Johnson-Shayama or setting a higher target for their outreach and training operation, which is like the CCE of Johnson-Shayama. So we've set them a higher target. The library is getting a 1% cut. Media, art, and production is getting a 1% cut. Nursing is getting a 1% cut. Facilities management is getting a 1% cut. So those are the 6 units out of the 25 or 26 odd operating units on campus that are getting base budget operating cuts this year.
And as Tom alluded to early on, another one of the bullets is that even though we talk about cuts, the reality is that every unit, except for the outreach and training unit in Johnson-Shayama, every unit, be it academic or administrative, is getting a net increase in their budget. And maybe, even if we use the largest one as an example.
So here, and we've set this all out, we've reformatted the table so you can see all of this in our attempt to increase the amount of information we're providing to you. Faculty of Arts is the largest of our academic units at an annual operating budget for this year of $16.39 million. A 2% budget reduction to arts is $334,000. However, faculty and staff salaries and benefits in arts are going up $551,000. So even with that base budget cut, arts is getting a net budget increase, if you follow me, of $217,000. Take science too, which is a very similar size, $16,269,000. There are no cuts in science this year, reflecting the growth that they've experienced in recent years. Salaries and benefits in science are going up $517,000 a year. So that even though there are no cuts and no increases to science, increased salaries and benefits are $500,000 of new money, permanent money, base budgeted money going into the Faculty of Science. And all of this is set out in the tables in the budget letter, which will be posted over lunch today.
I know we're still looking for questions and things like that. I'll invent some that are normally anticipated. One question is almost always, are there any layoffs as a result of this budget? No, there are no layoffs. Obviously, some of these cuts will require units to look at the impact on positions, and through vacancy management and reorganization, et cetera, there will be positions that will need to no longer be funded, but we do not anticipate any personnel layoffs as a result of the budget.
And how the cuts will be managed is very much up to the leader of the unit, the dean or director of the unit, in consultation with their leadership groups, their dean's executive, their budget advisory committees. So for example, in a faculty like arts, it will be up to the dean and his staff to decide how those cuts are going to be realized in the faculty. We do not make those decisions.
And I would also note that something that units do on an ongoing basis and is a requirement, particularly as we remain in challenging times, is having to rethink and look at the organizational structure and the mix of jobs and functions and things, so that there's always changes in job functions and activities. And there may be requirements that they can shuffle and things. But at this point, with respect to the budget, as you see, there's only 6 units that are having what I'll call a buying power reduction. So we don't anticipate that it requires any specific layoffs.
Does anyone have any questions? Garth has some questions.
Maybe while Garth, just to finish a thought on that as well, often a question always comes up about terms and sessionals. Of course, term positions, when I say no layoffs and things like that, there could be units who take and recognize with the some reduced budgets, or even reallocating budgets within their units, that they no longer have a need for a particular term position. So at the end of that specified term, which is by definition what term positions are about, that term is not extended. Or similarly, there may be sessional positions that at the unit level may be changed for other purposes. So.
Yeah, Garth Huber, physics. Okay, so my question is relating to the cut to the library. Of course, as we know, there's been a huge cut in research journals last year due to the exchange rate fluctuations. So it's very disappointing. So that, I assume, means that we should expect further cuts to research journals? Is that correct?
The journals, Garth, come from the acquisitions budget of the library rather than the operations budget. So the acquisitions is untouched. Now,
okay.
Anybody will point out immediately that's not very meaningful because the costs continue to rise. But our colleagues is anybody from the library here? I'm just looking for, yeah, Colleen. And by the way, this is Brett Waytak. Brett, could you wave, please? Our new university librarian just started this week. Our colleagues in the library have been working very hard on this issue. It's confronting all Canadian university libraries. There are two things: the exchange rate, which has increased the cost of these journals, almost all of which are priced in American dollars by 25 or 30% over the space of 18 months. We're all faced with this. But this notion of bundling, so that if I want, Garth, forgive me, I'll make this up, the Canadian Journal of Applied Physics, I've got to buy a bundle of 20 or 30 or 50 or 100 scientific journals at a very high cost. So what our colleagues in the library have been doing is consulting with faculty and staff and saying specifically which ones do you need. If we cease buying the big bundle, we may be able to buy the 2 or 3 in that bundle that we actually need and use. And so they've been working systematically with people about that. But the library's acquisitions budget at 2.9 mil by memory remains unchanged. And one thing that we have done, you'll see this in the budget letter on table 4, you'll see an entry that says access copyright, 180K. We're getting out of access copyright. You would have seen the notice to campus. We're getting out of that licensing arrangement. We believe we have the proper arrangements in place to protect the university against the risk of copyright infringement with the cooperation of everyone. But we've left the license amount in the library's budget for another year so that they can cope with some of the costs of getting out of access, making sure the right copyright provisions and software are in place. And if there's money left over, they have complete freedom to put that into acquisitions. So we've left that little bit. The 180K one time in the library is to put it in context, the library's 1% budget reduction on operating is $45,000. Giselle.
Question from me.
See, now you should have sat closer.
Giselle Marcotte, Director of Outreach and Training at Johnson-Shoyama Graduate School of Public
Yes.
Policy. Just trying to understand why the higher target for a transfer from O&T was applied, and what's not clear to me or obvious to me whether that's been applied to other administrative
Yes.
units.
Yes. The biggest example of the similar arrangement on campus is the Center for Continuing Education. CCE now effectively operates as you do on a very, very large scale with all of the non-credit programming in the conservatory, ESL, Seniors Education Center, lifelong learning, and so on and so forth. Their return to the university will be put up by approximately $1 million this year. So built into the budget is our expectation that CCE generates an additional $1 million of revenue for a total of about Lamont, by memory, about $9 million flowing back into university revenues so that we can then flow it out into units like Johnson-Shoyama, Arts, and Science. All of that money goes back out into operating units to help with those operations. So what we're looking for, quite frankly, Giselle, is increased cost recovery activity. It's part of the way that we're going to have to fund the university increasingly as the government grant fails to keep pace with annual increases in salaries and benefits. So what we're asking Outreach and Training to do basically is to generate another $50,000 a year in business. And if you exceed that, you keep the difference.
Excellent. So the difference, of course, is not profit for us. It's cost recovery for paying and for giving back to student scholarships and
Yep.
things like that. Has that been applied to other units in business administration, other places that have similar executive education programs such as ours.
CCE is the chief example. Kinesiology has recoveries in the range of about $4.4 million a year. Business, I frankly am not aware. Does anybody in the room know? Lamont, can you recall?
Just about every academic unit has a recovery budget. I'd put it akin to, because of the way that the revenue comes into that unit, it accrues directly to that unit. Every academic unit that does teaching, we're projecting and need a 1% enrollment increase. Indeed, we need more than that, which means that every unit needs to do more teaching with exactly what they've got. And that central tuition comes into the center, the units aren't getting it as well. So if the question is generally, is there a fair application and things like this, I think this is very, very fair in that we're asking everybody to do more. And because of the way that the money flows in outreach and training and in CCE, we're increasing both of those revenue targets to be able to take and contribute to the needs across campus.
And Giselle, I just looked this up to put this into some context. The total budgeted recoveries for JSGS this year are $452,000 against, say, the Faculty of Arts. Admittedly, a very different configuration, a very different set of programs. Faculty of Arts total recoveries are $95,000. So yours are large, but kinesiology, $4.6 million. Total business expected to be generated by CCE is $26 million. So these are increasingly important to overall university operations. Plus, we would remind you that all of the salaries and benefits, or nearly all of the salaries and benefits in the Johnson-Shama School are base funded by the university.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks. Just as long as it's being fairly, like the business school has the same configuration as ours in many cases, so hoping the same things applied.
Thank you. Business administration recoveries are budgeted at $1.37 million. Any other questions or comments or suggestions that people have? If not, Dave and I would like to thank you for coming. I think, too, we would like to thank some people who have been central to the development of this 16-17 budget. First of all, the Council Committee on Budget has been consulted on a number of occasions. That is elected by Council. We have had tremendous input from the deans and directors, associate vice presidents throughout the university about their needs. The people who do a lot of the very hard work on calculations and allocations in the budget-making process are here. Lamont Stradeski is here. Bob works on it. Dale Schofer is involved. Brian Christie is involved, and Rod Steffen. It's a tremendous amount of work, and we want to thank them for everything that they've done in assembling these documents, which again will be available to you no later than 1 o'clock this afternoon on the budget update and budget book pages. So thank you again for coming. If you do have any suggestions, there's the address.
Great, thank you very much. And I'd just like to echo the thanks in terms of general budget management. We couldn't do this without all of the support at both the faculty level and the unit level to take and provide the services to students, have them enjoy their time here and stay, and encourage their friends and family to come and to continue to grow enrollment for, I believe it's 9 years in a row now. Those of you that have been around in the years where we were in decreasing enrollments, if you can imagine how challenging that would be in an area or a time of reducing grant allocations, that we need that continued great support at every desk, every office, in the front of every classroom, in every research lab. We need that ongoing activity. Everybody contributes to making this budget, and in particular, generating the revenues. A big part of it is the funding formula shifts. Those enrollment increases that we enjoyed in terms of tuition revenue helped preserve. You may recall the budget challenge that we had. We got some good news items like that all generally from these enrollment increases that have made this, hopefully you see this as a softer budget challenge than originally expected. Indeed, there are cuts, they're not as deep, but it comes from the activities of every person at every desk to take and help us with recruitment, retention, teaching, and research. So thanks very much for that. We need that again for another year to take and help make budget making easy next year, it could be even more challenging. So thank you.